Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily Objective. And today is a very, very special day. We have a guest for the first time on the show who has some explaining to do. Let me tell you, people think I'm provocative. People think I go around pushing buttons. This is a guy who, in researching it's been exposed. He published a book and called it "Equal is Unfair." So just right off the bat, this guy is automatically a provocateur. And if that weren't enough, he gets on Twitter and says, I'm not a Christian. I don't wish bad people well. I'm surprised Twitter even lets this guy on. I mean, this is like a violation of the community guidelines of humanity itself. And if all that weren't bad enough, I have reason to think he was referring to the President of the United States. I don't know about you guys, but I say there is no greater honor than serving in the office of a country that many people fought to defend. But let's give him a chance to explain himself before we delete him from objectivism and this podcast. Please welcome, the man is an absolute myth, Don Watkins.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And of course, we've got a guy who's he's from the land of mythology itself. I'm talking about the ancient Greek mythology. I'm talking about Nikos Sotirakopoulos.
Thank you. So here's the context today. So the question is, should we wish Trump well, basically? He had this adventure with COVID. So I will take the side that says yes. And this is for two reasons. So I'm not saying that someone should wish everyone well out of context. So that's the difference between someone who takes this as an out of context absolute, so to speak, like a Christian would do, and what I would do. So obviously I would not wish well, for example, Hitler. I would not even wish well someone who is a person who wants to harm me, seriously wants to harm me in an unprovoked way. But the simple fact is that Trump does not reach that bar for me of evil that I wouldn't wish someone well. Therefore, I sympathized with his battle, or however you want to call it, with COVID. But there's another issue, which is for me even perhaps more important for this. So I would say the same thing if Trump was dealing with, for example, hepatitis or cancer or whatever. But with the COVID issue, there's an extra reason. Because here we have a disease that it has been serious and tragic and lethal for actually millions of people. So I recognize this. But also it's a disease that one of its major impacts has been the fear that it has installed in our hearts and how it, in a way, it has stopped our way of life. And as time goes by, this fear keeps, in a way, even growing in some ways. So I think that the spectacle, which at some points was theatrical, ridiculous, I'll agree with that. But the spectacle of someone dealing with it in a /brave, /cocky, /sometimes ridiculous, I'll agree. But it gave a positive message. It made many people, it gave a positive message to some people. And what he said, that he got a lot of criticism, that says, don't let it dominate your life. I really like that. Because people criticizing what should the approach be? What should be the approach by leaders? Saying, yeah, let this dominate your life. Let's wait till a vaccine or whatever. Until then, yeah, millions of lives will be ruined from fear or from the other problems that COVID brings. But yeah, so this is why, like Marilyn Monroe sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," with a less sensual but more Balkan accent, I will sing "Get Well Soon, Mr. President."
And now we know why Ayn Rand hated balkanization. Okay, that was a desperate joke. Don, do you have any thoughts so far on what Nikos just said?
I mean, I don't largely disagree with anything that he said. I haven't really followed what's happened since the president left the hospital, so I've heard various things, but I don't necessarily trust, Twitter reports. So I don't want to get anything into how he's responded since then. But what I want to stress is that where I was coming from was I generally have an orientation that if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything. But I wanted to make a real point, and it was really a point deeper than politics, and it's a point about what it means to value human life. And there's this widespread view that to value human life is to value every human life, regardless of the nature of the person involved. And often it's from a Christian perspective, right? That says that we all have a bit of the divine inside of us. And I really take seriously two things that are relevant to this. One is this idea that Ayn Rand had, that man is a being of self-made soul, and that then the virtue of justice requires recognizing the facts about how they've created their soul. And so if somebody is deeply immoral, then the question is, what is my judgment of them, and what kind of actions will I take with respect to them? And so my judgment of Trump is that here's somebody who's very deeply immoral. And I mean, we could talk about why that is, but the wider point here is that if one has that view, that I don't wish them well. Now, that's very different than like popping the champagne and celebrating somebody's suffering. I think that could be appropriate when somebody's like, the kind of examples Nikos gave, if somebody's actively trying to kill you, like think about the defeat of Osama bin Laden. I think it's legitimate to say, all right, we got him before he got us. Like that, I put that in a different category. But wishing somebody well is a positive action. It's about actually expressing a desire to see them flourish. And I think that's inappropriate when it's somebody who hasn't earned the right for people to want to see them flourish.
There were a lot of responses to the tweet. So maybe you could respond to like a couple of them. So people say, oh, who can know what's moral? Who are you to decide? What are you, the arbiter of all morality? If you were speaking to the person who replied that way, how might you respond?
Well, all of us have to make moral assessments to govern our way through life. If you don't make moral assessments, who are you going to be at the mercy of? Who benefits from that? Well, it's certainly not moral people. Good people benefit by people being concerned with morality. That's what justice is about. It's about saying, hey, Rucka, hey, Nikos, you guys have made something of your life. You treat people honestly. You're productive. And so therefore, I'm going to deal with you. I'm going to work with you. And then, hey, if you're criminal, if you're somebody who has contempt for truth, who tries to, live off of people in one way or another, manipulate them, I don't want to deal with you. And if you don't make those assessments, then you're benefiting the bad at the expense of the good.
Good point.
And I throw another question here. So for some reason, what I was thinking this afternoon was, when Athens was occupied by the Germans and the Red Army was defeating the Nazis, you would see banners like honoring the victories of the Red Army. So you have a situation where you wouldn't, out of context, wish well to the Red Army, but when you're starving and being tortured by the Nazis, and your first priority, let's say, is to defeat, you could say, okay, within this context, I will cheer for something I would otherwise not cheer. Now, I'm not saying that, obviously, that Trump is on the same category with Zhukov and the Red Army. It just, for some reason, was stuck to my mind this afternoon. So would you say, Don, though, that within the context of how people are viewing COVID and all this misinformation, there were all these people saying that, oh, now Trump has he has a lot of chance of dying or whatever. So within this gloomy atmosphere, would you say that actually it is worthy promoting the value of recovering from this disease? And we're talking about the most recognizable figure on planet Earth. So why not say that within this context, let's say not the enemy of my enemy, but because, the COVID is the metaphysical, not the man-made, to put it in objective terms. But within this context, it is important for Trump to overcome this in a spectacular and a bombastic way.
Well, I think you have to actually play out the tape a little bit. And, there would definitely be a value of if somebody unfortunately got sick and then it was very public and they recovered and they came out and said, look at the evidence. This can be very dangerous to people who are old and who are at high risk, but most people are like me. And I'm happy that I went about my life without just, sitting in a basement somewhere waiting for it to pass. and here's the evidence that one should take into account when thinking about the actual risks and so on, that would be really wonderful. But if you have somebody who's going to then symbolize the no fear position, who has a real contempt for evidence, and who is, from what I've heard now, I was explicit that I do not trust these secondhand reports. But if it's right that there was a certain kind of like, the people who get sick are losers, like statements like that, or that they're weak or something, then I think you discredit that view. The mere fact that you got well does not necessarily do anything good for your cause. And I'll make a parallel to this, which is that, for example, I think on the issue of like climate change and energy, the people within the administration have better views on energy than their critics. But when those are defended by somebody who basically says, climate change is a hoax, it's going to get colder in a few years, when you have an unscientific basis for what is what can be defended properly on the basis of science, you undermine the right position. So you don't get points for holding the right position. And this is a point Ayn Rand often stressed. She thought somebody like Hayek, who gave bad reasons for capitalism, which was the view that she agreed with, capitalism, was more dangerous than somebody who just came out and attacked capitalism, because you discredit it. And that would be my worry.
So what comes to mind for me when I hear that, I mean, that all sounds like something Rand said, and I tend to agree. But at the same time, as an advocate for liberty, obviously you've got overlap with various types of people that do defend liberty on grounds that we don't hold. So, I mean, I guess, do you see any conflict between this idea that, people defending liberty or defending anything you agree with on the wrong grounds is worse than an enemy?
Well, there's
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there's two kinds of cases that you should distinguish it from. So one is if you're talking about just a concrete coalition of like, hey, we want to, let's say we want to end the death penalty because we think that it is a real threat to innocent people in this country. And there's going to be a lot of people in there who are doing it on Christian grounds, but it's all about a specific concrete, and you can offer good reasons and there's no implication that you agree with the bad reasons. I think those kinds of coalitions can be fine as long as they're for a very concrete policy outcome. And then Ayn Rand had this distinction between people like Hayek, who she thought were real poison, in her words, to the pro-capitalism movement, and people like the economist Ludwig von Mises, who were in agreement but didn't go all the way. Like they had certain kind of contradictions. They fell short of, in her view, supporting full laissez-faire, but they weren't laying down principles that undercut the case for capitalism. Then she thought, no, those are in effect our peers. They're on our side. And it's not always obvious, I think, who belongs in what category, but the idea is not you have to agree with everybody 100% in order to work together. It's just you have to be really clear on, are they supporting me, but they're going to be less effective than they would if they had a fully well articulated argument, or did they undercut me? And I think those can be hard assessments, but that's the distinction that I would go after.
Yeah, and the problem with social media is that in one respect, it is the greatest opportunity ever to spread what you believe, but at the same time, it's almost impossible to be clear. And so when you tweet something that's sort of slighting Donald Trump, a lot of people might think you hate Trump for the same reason that a lot of leftists might hate Trump, which are not necessarily why you hate Trump or why you have a problem with them at all. So I guess this sort of speaks to social media in the bigger picture. Do you see what's the cash value of a tweet like that? Is it that people might follow you and then hear you flesh out these ideas more?
Yeah, that's a really good issue to bring up, because that's definitely I have very clear reasons why and how I use something like Twitter. And there's a couple of different things. Some uses are just kind of like, I want to test out different material or find out how would people respond to this argument. Something like this is pure, I think, mostly in the grounds of it's something that I stand behind. I know that it's going to be misinterpreted and so on. Like you said, you can't avoid that on a forum like Twitter. I can clarify to a certain degree, but yeah, it's attention getting. Now, I hope there's enough intellectual content there, and then, to back it up. And in my other forums, I don't believe in attention getting for the sake of attention getting. So I'm not by nature a provocateur. And like, if you knew me in real life, you realize I don't actually like contentious debates and things like that. But insofar as my goals are to help the liberty movement become more persuasive, part of that is doing things that do kind of stir the pot and get attention, but then to show that there's real depth behind it. So there's a difference. What I wouldn't do is, these kinds of stunts that are purely for shock value, and I think undermine a legitimate argument.
So I think it's having Don, we have to pick his brain on Twitter and on social media, because he's one of the people in the movement who understands communication better than anyone else. So let me ask you straight. So did you expect that this tweet would have this appeal? And did you feel at any point, ooh, maybe that wasn't a great idea? Or was this just, oh, let's see what happens? Or was it intentional that this is going to create a lot of noise, so maybe the message will be passed or whatever?
Well, one of the things I've noticed just on Twitter is it's really hard to predict what will take off. I've had things that I thought were more controversial or more likely to get attention that just went into the ether and nobody cared about. And so I always view it as kind of a crapshoot and an experiment. And part of it is an experiment. Part of it, I'm curious what's going to work and what's not, because like I said, I view Twitter as a testing ground for material. I was a little hesitant because I don't comment much on Trump specifically. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one is that I view I think that there's many people who support him who I still want to reach and have valuable things to say. And given my mission, which is not like, I'm not primarily interested in commenting on politics. I'm primarily interested in teaching people how to think and communicate pro-liberty ideas better. Alienating that contingent, there's just not a lot of value to that for me. But on the other hand, I'm not going to pretend I have different views than I do. So that was the only thing that gave me hesitation, was that not that it would be misunderstood or be controversial, but just I don't comment on personalities in politics very often. And the question was, all right, do I have a real point here that I want to make, or is this just more an emotional expression? And I definitely had a point, and it was a point deeper than politics. It was a point about ethics and about the way we should think about, as I said, what it means to value humanity. And so I thought that's a point worth making, even if it pisses off a few people.
Just a quick follow-up. So in one of the courses that, by the way, I encourage people to go to Don's writing and take them, there's treasure there in the communication courses. But at some point you give an example that people don't react to facts qua facts. They react to facts based on what are their values. And you give the example of a prominent Democrat dying on a car accident and the love of your life dying on a car accident or getting seriously injured. Same fact, different responses. And that made me think, do you think, because in a way Trump is an easy target, so do you think that in social media it's much easier to write something very controversial versus against Trump? So do you think that this would really get you into trouble if this was, I don't know, Nancy Pelosi or Elizabeth Warren?
Well, certainly it wouldn't with my following. I mean, there's probably some people who follow me who are more who are Christian or hold sort of a religious view who would disagree with it. But I think for the world that I live in, which is typically people who view themselves as aligned with liberty, even if I think that they might actually not really understand it and value it, they're more inclined to follow me, and they're more inclined to identify with somebody like Trump and the Republicans rather than the Democrats. And so I think it would be hard to imagine people getting particularly upset if I said that.
So basically the message is, if you believe in it and if you're convinced that what you say is correct, post it, right? Within reason and context.
Well, yeah, but this is an important amendment. I think the context is really important. You have to know why you're using social media. Like I am, by the nature of what I'm doing, in the business of communicating ideas and teaching people how to communicate ideas. And so for me, there's like nobody can fire me. Like there's very little downside of me posting something controversial. And in fact, this got more attention than most any tweet I've ever posted. I mean, it's not like it got 90,000 views, but several hundred likes and I think over 100 shares, which is a lot for me because I've only been doing Twitter in recent times for a few months. But like, I think for most people, there is a very big price to pay for being controversial, and so you just have to know why you're doing it and have a really good reason to do it and be deliberate. So I have a lot more room to make mistakes and a lot more positive values to be gained just given my career than like, if you're a teacher at a public school system, I would say the bar is probably a little higher for saying things controversial. I don't mean you should hide your views. And in fact, I encourage people to be more outspoken about their ideas. But when you get into particular people versus ideas, I think the equation can change, and it's a question. Well, all right, well, is it really worth exposing yourself to that?
Rucka, you played the role of the interviewer, but how about finishing it off by your take on all this? So what do you think about wishing people well or not, and also social media? And then at the end, give me 5 seconds for the parting words.
I mean, there's a lot of rich content to untangle and unpack there. I mean, I like the idea of bashing, the Republicans because, they're kind of where things are most troublesome these days. I know that upsets people. I like the idea of challenging atheists, of challenging sort of, alleged secularists and say, look, this standard where, love of all humanity and loving everybody is the ideal to strive for. That came from religion. That came from mysticism. That is not a rational position to hold. So I like the idea of challenging them. And in fact, you see some of the replies to the tweet are saying, hey, I'm not a Christian and I do wish bad people well. I'm a benevolent. I mean, they don't use that word, but I love humanity, and various other things. The thing that comes to mind most for me these days when I see something like that, and some of the students of objectivism replying to a tweet like that, kind of brings to mind that these ideas are just that until people are really kind of learning these lessons in real life. So the idea of, judge and prepare to be judged, and that condemning evil is just and rewarding good is just. It's true, and it gives people an opportunity to speak out. But what worries me is that a lot of people might not be learning these lessons in their real life, and it's just sort of something that they're preaching. Obviously, Don is a wise and seasoned scholar. I'm talking about some of the people like myself who are sort of who sort of got into preaching some stuff that we're still kind of figuring out. So.
Right. So an interesting takeaway is also that this idea that objectivists agree on everything. So we say it every time, this is not the voice of objectivism. That's not even the voice of ARC UK. This is us having our opinions. But it's quite interesting how often we end up, disagreeing on issues that it's more about not what the philosophy is, but how the philosophy is applied. So before we say goodbye, let me tell people that in 5 minutes in our YouTube channel is going to be another one of our animated videos with something on Extinction Rebellion and how it is related to your values and your life. So I encourage people to go there, and the short video, it's one of these short animated 1 minute and something videos, is going to debut in 5 minutes. So Don, how can people follow your work and the things that you're doing?
I mean, they can follow me on Twitter at Don's Writing, where they can get more of those kinds of tweets, although hopefully not more of those kinds of tweets. But the best places to go are donswriting.com and sign up for the newsletter. And then my YouTube channel is where most of my new content comes out. And that's at youtube.com/Don Watkins Live.
Thank you very much. So from me, Rucka, and John, all the best.
Thanks, guys.